The streets of Concord, California in the late 1950s were wide and quiet, lined with young sycamore trees that cast dappled shadows on the pavement. In a modest ranch-style house on a cul-de-sac, a small boy named Tom would often sit on the front steps, watching the slow drift of clouds and the occasional station wagon rolling by. The air smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt, a scent that lingered in the memory like a half-remembered lullaby. He was a child of quiet observation, more comfortable with a lamplit book or a Saturday movie matinee than with the boisterous games of other children. Even then, there was a patience in him, a stillness that made people feel oddly at ease. His parents' marriage was a fragile thing, stretched thin by long work hours and unspoken disappointments. When Tom was just 5 years old, the quiet of the house gave way to something colder, a silence between two people who no longer knew how to fill it. The divorce arrived not as a storm but as a slow, inevitable dusk. He and his siblings were divided between parents, and Tom went with his father, Amos, a chef whose gentle hands found more comfort in a kitchen than in fatherly speeches. Packing his small suitcase, Tom learned early that home was not a permanent address, but a feeling you carried inside you, like a vague warmth you could cup in your hands on a chilly morning. Life became a patchwork of new cities and rented houses, of cardboard boxes stacked in unfamiliar hallways. By the time he reached his teenage years, Tom had lived in more than a dozen different places across California. Each move was a small erasure, a fading of his own story as he introduced himself yet again to new classmates who already had their circles. He coped by becoming a chameleon, adapting his accent and mannerisms to fit in, never standing out enough to be a target. In a way, he was already acting not on a stage, but in the everyday theater of survival. The loneliness of the constantly new sharpened his empathy, teaching him to read the subtle cues of human loneliness and joy. In junior high, a shyness settled over him like a soft fog. He was tall for his age and a little clumsy, afraid of drawing the wrong kind of attention. But he found sanctuary in two places, the local cinema and his bedroom, where he would tune the radio to old-time storytelling programs. The voices crackled through the speaker, full of character and drama, and he would lie on his bed, imagining their faces, their gestures. It was a gentle apprenticeship in the power of voice and narrative, a secret education that asked nothing of him but his attention. The glow of the radio dial was a small sun in the dark room, a companion that never packed its bags. High school in Oakland brought a startling discovery. One afternoon, wandering the halls after the last bell, Tom passed the auditorium and heard a murmur of voices from within. He pushed open the heavy door and slipped into the back row, where a handful of students were rehearsing a scene on a nearly bare stage. The light from a single overhead fixture fell in a warm amber pool on the wooden floor, and the actors moved through it like figures from a dream. He felt something loosen in his chest, a quiet recognition that here, in this half-lit space, it was okay to pretend, to be someone else, to let all those inner observations find a voice. He joined the drama club soon after, not out of grand ambition, but because for the first time, a room felt like a welcome mat rather than a locked door. His drama teacher, a gentle-eyed man with a salt-and-pepper beard, was the first person to tell Tom he had a gift. After a simple monologue delivered in a clear, unhurried voice, the teacher leaned back and said, "You make people want to listen." It was a remark as understated as the boy himself, but it took root deep in Tom's heart. In that school auditorium, with its red velvet seats and the faint smell of dust and perfume, he began to understand that performance was not about showing off, it was about offering a piece of yourself so genuinely that others could see themselves in it. The applause was pleasant, but the connection was the real thing. After graduation, he enrolled at Chabot Community College in Hayward, a quiet campus of brick buildings and sprawling lawns. He took courses in theater arts, working backstage and on stage, still uncertain whether this passion could ever become a livelihood. Money was scarce, so he often worked evening shifts at a hotel, his hands submerged in soapy water as he washed dishes, his mind rehearsing lines from Shakespeare. The steam rose around his face, and in the clatter of plates, he heard the rhythm of iambic pentameter. It was a humble, unglamorous time, lit by the fluorescent hum of a commercial kitchen, but he was unknowingly building the quiet endurance that would define his career. Every clean plate was a small promise that something better would come. During those years, a girlfriend encouraged him to audition for a local theater production. He landed a small part, and soon community theater became his true classroom. He appeared in productions of The Taming of the Shrew and other classics, playing in tiny playhouses where the seats creaked and the audience could almost touch the actors. In those intimate spaces, he learned the craft of making a performance feel like a conversation, not a proclamation. The curtain call was often just a few friends applauding warmly, but to Tom, it was enough. In a world of constant motion, the stage became the one place where he could stand still and be exactly who he was supposed to be. The Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival held its rehearsals in a cavernous old theater in Cleveland, a place where the scent of aged wood and old costumes hung perpetually in the air. Tom Hanks arrived there in the summer of 1977, a 21-year-old with little more than a duffel bag and a head full of ambition disguised as timidity. The festival was a gathering place for serious young actors and seasoned professionals, all drawn to the challenge of bringing the bard's words to life in a city that still carried the industrial soul of the Rust Belt. The building itself felt like a character. Creaky floors, ornate plasterwork, and a ghost light always left burning center stage when the theater was empty. In that quiet glow, Tom found his second home. His days began early, walking through streets lined with brick warehouses and the distant hum of factory machinery. The morning light in Cleveland had a soft, diffused quality, as if filtered through a thin layer of memory. He would stop at a corner diner for a cup of black coffee, sitting by the window as the city slowly stirred awake. Those solitary moments became a ritual of grounding, a pause before the intensity of rehearsal. He was learning that the actor's life was not all applause and costumes, but long hours of silent preparation, of poring over a script until the words became as familiar as his own breath. The coffee cup warmed his hands, and outside the window, delivery trucks rumbled past in the golden morning haze. At the festival, he played a string of supporting roles, a comic servant here, a confused messenger there. He studied the veteran actors with the concentration of a watchmaker, noting how they used their bodies, their voices, even their silences. The director, a patient man with owlish glasses, encouraged him to trust his natural tendency toward understatement. "You don't need to shout to be heard," he once said. Tom took that lesson to heart, crafting performances that felt less like acting and more like an honest conversation with the audience. In the wings, waiting for his cue, he would stand completely still, listening to the murmured lines on stage, feeling the invisible thread that connected performer and spectator. The city of Cleveland, with its resilient, unpretentious character, seeped into his own. On days off, he would wander through the West Side Market, a vast hall of fresh produce and butcher stalls, where the chatter of vendors mixed with the scent of smoked meats and fresh basil. The cathedral-like architecture of the market, with its high-arched ceiling and streams of natural light, made him feel part of something enduring and communal. He was a young man from California, still marveling at the snow that blanketed the streets in winter, the way it softened every edge and sound. In the silence of a snowy evening, after a performance, he would walk back to his small apartment, his footsteps the only sound, the street lamps glowing like low-hanging moons. Offstage, his friendships were modest but deep. Fellow actors would gather in a local tavern, a warm, wood-paneled place with flickering candles on each table. They would talk about characters long into the night, dissecting motivations, laughing at missed cues, sharing the peculiar intimacy of a traveling troupe. Tom was never the loudest at the table, but his humor was quick and self-deprecating, a quiet warmth that drew people in. These were young people living on little money and much hope, and the tavern became a sanctuary where the pressures of the theater dissolved into the camaraderie of youth. The candlelight reflected in their glasses, and for a few hours, the world outside was nothing but snowflakes falling gently against the window panes. After 3 seasons in Cleveland, the pull of New York City became impossible to ignore. In 1979, Tom packed his belongings and moved to the East Coast, a journey that felt both terrifying and inevitable. His first apartment in the city was a fifth-floor walk-up in Hell's Kitchen, a small room with a window that looked out onto a brick wall and a sliver of sky. The noise of the city was a constant companion: distant sirens, the rumble of the subway, laughter from the street below. Yet inside that tiny space, he created a stillness. A single bookshelf held a growing collection of plays, and a typewriter, an old manual Underwood, sat on a wobbly desk, a gift from his father. At night, he would type letters home, the clack of the keys a soothing rhythm. The grind of auditions was a lesson in humility. Day after day, he rode the subway to casting offices, clutching a headshot and resume, waiting in hallways with dozens of other hopefuls. The fluorescent lights of those waiting rooms were unkind, the silence often heavy with envy and anxiety. Tom learned to treat each audition not as a judgment, but as a chance to practice his craft for a few minutes. Between appointments, he worked odd jobs, moving furniture, passing out flyers, his tall frame and friendly demeanor earning him just enough to pay the rent. In the afternoons, he would sometimes sit in Central Park, watching the light ripple on the lake, reminding himself that the city's chaos was just a faster version of the moving boxes he had always known. A small breakthrough came with a role in an off-Broadway production, a modest play staged in a tiny theater on the Lower East Side. The venue was so intimate that the front row's knees almost touched the stage. Tom played a lovelorn young man, infusing the character with a vulnerability that made the audience lean forward, holding their breath. Critics barely noticed the production, but an agent did, a soft-spoken woman who recognized that his ordinary guy charm was not an absence of talent, but its own rare kind of star quality. She signed him, and soon after, he was cast in a television sitcom called Bosom Buddies. The job would take him to Los Angeles, a city of perpetual sunshine and sprawling possibility. As he packed his suitcase once again, Tom felt the familiar mix of sadness and excitement, the feeling of a chapter closing and a new window opening onto an unknown, golden light. Los Angeles in the early 1980s was a place of perpetual motion, a city built on dreams and freeway overpasses. Tom Hanks arrived with a television contract and a quiet determination that felt almost out of place among the palm-lined streets and neon billboards. The sitcom Bosom Buddies required him to dress in drag to secure an affordable apartment, but beneath the comedic premise, he infused his character with a sincerity that caught the attention of casting directors. The California sun poured through the studio windows, warm and golden, and between takes he would sit on the backlit, watching the crew adjust lights, feeling the strange, suspended peace of a working set. He was no longer a struggling actor. He was a young professional learning to build a life in a city that never truly stood still. His big screen debut came with a small role in a slasher film, but it was the 1984 romantic comedy Splash that changed everything. The story of a man who falls in love with a mermaid was whimsical and tender, and Tom's portrayal of the bewildered, good-hearted Alan Bauer resonated deeply with audiences. He brought to the role a vulnerability that was rare in leading men of the era, a willingness to be confused, to be vulnerable, to wear his heart not on his sleeve, but in the glint of his eye. Filming took place partly on the coast, where the Pacific Ocean stretched out in endless blue, and the gentle crash of waves became the set's background music. In the early morning shoots, mist rose from the water and the film crew moved like silent dancers in the soft light. Off-screen, Tom was quietly building a reputation as one of the most likable people in Hollywood. He showed up on time, knew his lines, and treated the crew with the same respect he gave the director. On the set of Splash, he became friends with his co-star Daryl Hannah, their easy chemistry a reflection of genuine mutual admiration. During breaks, they would sit on the sandy beach, eating sandwiches from the craft services table, talking about everything and nothing. The waves rolled in, rhythmic and eternal, and Tom found that the anxiety of performance melted away in those simple moments. He was learning that being a good actor didn't require being difficult or mysterious. It required being present, attentive, and human. The film's success was a gentle explosion, not the kind that shatters, but the kind that opens doors. Suddenly, Tom was a sought-after name, offered scripts that ranged from broad comedies to thoughtful dramas. Yet he remained cautious, aware that the spotlight could just as easily burn as illuminate. He purchased his first real home, a modest Spanish-style house in the Pacific Palisades, with a terracotta roof and a garden of lavender and rosemary. In the mornings, he would sit on the patio with a cup of coffee, the scent of herbs drifting on the breeze, and read scripts in the quiet. The city's noise felt distant there, reduced to a hum that was almost musical. It was a sanctuary where he could still be the boy who listened to radio dramas in the dark. A small, deeply personal film followed in 1986, Nothing in Common, in which Tom played a young advertising executive grappling with his aging father. The movie allowed him to explore a more somber, textured emotional range. The sets were often quiet interiors, a father's cluttered apartment, a dimly lit living room where painful conversations unfolded in low voices. On those sets, Tom discovered the power of restraint. The most powerful moments were not the shouted arguments, but the long silences between them, the way a camera could capture the flicker of love and frustration in a single glance. Between takes, he would stand by the window, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline, absorbing the city's muted colors into his performance. It was the 1988 film Big that cemented his ability to embody childlike wonder without a trace of artifice. The story of a boy who wakes up in a man's body became a modern fairy tale, and Tom's performance was a masterclass in physical and emotional nuance. The iconic scene in a toy store, where he and his boss play a duet on a giant floor piano, was shot over the course of a single, joyful night. The set was bathed in the cozy glow of department store lights, the polished floor reflecting the soft colors of the toys. Tom insisted on learning the piano piece himself, practicing for hours so that the performance would feel spontaneous and authentic. The result was a scene of pure, unguarded happiness, a moment that still warms viewers like a memory of their own childhood. During the filming of Big, Tom met actress Rita Wilson, a kind-eyed woman with a gentle laugh who would become the most important person in his life. Their friendship grew slowly, through long conversations on set and walks through the streets of New York, where the movie was shot. The city's rhythm became the backdrop to their courtship. Horse-drawn carriages in Central Park, quiet dinners in corner restaurants, the sudden rain showers that sent them running for cover under a shared umbrella. Love arrived not as a dizzying whirlwind, but as a steady sunrise, illuminating the landscape of his days with a soft, enduring warmth. He began to understand that his greatest role was not on any screen, but in the quiet moments of connection that lay ahead. By the end of the decade, Tom Hanks had become a beloved figure, not because he was the loudest or the flashiest, but because he offered something rare, the sense that decency could be magnetic. His characters were never superheroes or smooth-talking rogues. They were ordinary men navigating life with clumsy grace and good intentions. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, he packed away the cheerful clutter of his early fame and looked toward a new era, one that would demand even more of his heart. On a quiet evening, sitting on his patio as the lavender bushes swayed in the twilight, he felt a profound gratitude, the kind that settles over you like a favorite blanket, and he knew the journey was only just beginning. The early 1990s brought scripts that asked more of Tom Hanks than any previous work. He was in his mid-30s, his hair beginning to thin slightly, his face carrying the gentle lines of experience. The first of these challenges was Philadelphia, a 1993 drama about a lawyer battling AIDS discrimination. The role required him to portray physical decline, emotional isolation, and a courage that came not from heroism, but from simple human dignity. He prepared by losing weight and spending time with men living with the illness, listening to their stories in sun-filled hospital rooms and quiet living rooms. The film's sets were often spare and intimate, a lawyer's office, a hospital bed, a courtroom. The lighting was subdued, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken love and loss. One of the most memorable scenes was filmed in a city park, where his character Andrew Beckett sat on a bench, a wool cap pulled over his head, gazing at passersby who were oblivious to his struggle. Tom asked the director, Jonathan Demme, to let the camera linger on his face as the world moved around him. The result was a long, wordless shot of a man watching life continue, his eyes carrying a universe of sorrow and acceptance. The park was an ordinary patch of green in Philadelphia, with old oak trees and a gravel path where children ran and couples strolled. The late afternoon light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on his still figure. It was a moment stripped of all pretense, and it moved audiences to tears. During the production, Tom was accompanied on set by his wife Rita, who offered quiet support. Their relationship had become a foundation, a steady pulse beneath the chaos of filmmaking. In the evenings, they would walk together through the streets of Philadelphia, past brick buildings and old churches, the city's history a comforting presence. They talked about the role, the responsibility of telling a story that reflected real pain and real prejudice. Tom felt a deep obligation not to sensationalize the suffering but to communicate the quiet, everyday courage of those who face such trials. In a small Italian restaurant, over a simple dinner of pasta and wine, he found solace in the normalcy of love and companionship, the candlelight reflecting in Rita's empathetic eyes. The film premiered to acclaim, and Tom's performance earned him his first Academy Award for Best Actor. On the night of the Oscars, he stood on stage in a classic tuxedo, the gold statuette heavy in his hands. The applause was thunderous, but his speech was characteristically humble. He thanked the people who had shared their stories, his voice steady but thick with emotion. He mentioned his high school drama teacher, the one who had said he made people want to listen. The orchestra began to play him off, but he finished with a genuine, heartfelt tribute to those who loved extravagantly. Back in his seat, as the ceremony continued, he held Rita's hand, the two of them enveloped in the soft glow of the auditorium lights. Just a year later, he was offered the role that would become synonymous with his name, Forrest Gump. The script, adapted from Winston Groom's novel, told the picaresque story of a simple man with a kind heart who finds himself present at pivotal moments in American history. Tom approached the character with a reverence for innocence. He worked with a dialect coach to perfect Forrest's soft southern drawl, a voice as gentle as a summer breeze. Filming began in the low country of South Carolina, where Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees, and the air was thick with the scent of magnolia. The town of Beaufort was transformed into the fictional Greenbow, Alabama, a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The bench at the bus stop, where Forrest narrates his life story to strangers, became the film's emotional anchor. The bench was a simple wooden slat, placed under a live oak in Savannah's Chippewa Square. During the shoot, Tom would sit there for hours under the warm Georgia sun, delivering monologues that were by turns comical and heartbreaking. Passers-by often stopped to watch, some moved to tears just by the sight of the actor completely immersed in the character's gentle, trusting gaze. The square was framed by historic buildings and the distant toll of a church bell, and the light had a golden, honeyed quality that made every leaf and blade of grass seem luminous. The physical production was elaborate, requiring Tom to be inserted into archival footage of presidents and celebrities, but the heart of the performance was always in the small, unadorned moments. There was a quiet scene at the grave of Forrest's beloved Jenny under a canopy of trees, where Tom spoke with such tenderness that the crew fell silent. The birdsong in the background became the only accompanying music. After the director called cut, many crew members wiped their eyes. Tom himself stayed by the prop gravestone for a few minutes, unwilling to break the spell, his hand resting on the cool marble. It was a reminder that acting, at its purest, is an act of profound empathy. Forrest Gump became a cultural phenomenon, winning 6 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Tom once again. The world embraced Forrest's simple wisdom, and Tom Hanks was now not just a star, but an institution. Yet the recognition did not change his fundamental nature. He returned to his family, to the Spanish-style house with the lavender garden, and slipped back into the rhythms of domestic life. In interviews, he spoke softly, deflecting praise to the writers, the director, the crew. He understood that the characters he played were gifts, and he received them with the same grateful stillness he had learned as a boy listening to the radio in the dark. The journey was not about fame. It was about the quiet grace of telling stories that made people feel less alone.